customers. What I'm going to talk about now is more of interest to service providers. And so I'm Colin Durocher. I work in product management. This has been a personal project of mine. I've been working with VMware for the better part of a year on this. And so what we've done is, well, actually, let me go over the agenda first. I'm going to give you a high-level overview of this plugin that we've put together for vCloud Director. Then I'm going to go over the use cases, give you a few quick screenshots just to give you an idea, and then I'm going to jump into a demo. If we have time, I've got two demos. One shows the user experience for service providers, which is really less exciting. I think what's really exciting about what we've done here is the user experience for tenants. That's what really sells the service providers on this plugin is, hey, I can go out there and sell a service that has a really great user experience for my customers.
Can I just say that, you've just addressed my confusion because the title in the beginning, the session says mid-sized organizations, and we started with 4,400. And that's why I held back my service provider questions. And then suddenly there was also vCloud Director, and I'm thinking, but that's for service providers who surely will need something bigger than 4,400s.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, so
now I'm clearer.
So the plugin that I'm talking about here absolutely works with the DP4400, but it also works with our backup software paired up with our data domains from the virtual edition up to the biggest iron, big boxes with petabytes of storage. So, okay, so first thing I want to do is just flash up, these hero numbers, right? Again, because this is one of the things that gets service providers excited about our solution in particular is the dedupe, right, which leads to incredible cost efficiencies, goes directly to their bottom lines, allows them to go out to their enterprise and mid-sized customers and sell them a service at a lower cost and still carve out some good margin for themselves. And I don't know if Ranga mentioned it, but these numbers have all been validated by third-party testing by ESG Labs. The 55-to-1 dedupe is something that we see as an average across our customer base for data domain with Avamar and IDPA in combination. Okay, so really this is giving you the benefits that we go out and talk about with our service providers. Number one is seamless integration into vCloud Director. So about a year ago, actually at VMworld last year, Telefonica came to us with an idea. They said, hey, vCloud Director has this extensible UI now. That's something that they're coming out with, or that I think at the time they had already come out with it. And they were a longtime customer of Avamar, and they said, look, we see an opportunity here for a much better user experience, because right now, customers go to one portal to manage their virtual data centers. They have to go to a different portal to manage data protection for those virtual data centers. Why can't we just all have that in one portal, right? And so that's what we've done. We spent, like I said, the last year working with VMware and with Telefonica as a lighthouse customer for us, bouncing ideas off them. They were helping us to prioritize what we would include in this plugin, et cetera. And so we've delivered this seamless user experience. So that's number one. Number two, we went over the cost efficiencies, right? So I'm not going to belabor that point. But number three is performance. So already our solutions, our backup software is very performant. A large part of that comes down to the dedupe. There is some other secret sauce in the software itself. But for the plugin in particular, we go beyond that in terms of scale and performance by scaling out. So one plugin, which serves one vCloud Director deployment, can handle a multitude of Avamars, a multitude of data domains. So you can scale that out. You can have one Avamar, one data domain, and share that among 1,000 tenants. But if your environment grows beyond the limits of what that setup can handle, you can extend it with more instances of Avamar and data domain. Okay? Any questions on this sort of high-level overview so far? No? Okay. So I'm going to go over the use cases for the plugin. This is what we enable for the cloud admin as well as for the tenant admin. First, one thing I want to mention is that the multi-tenancy architecture that's built into this plugin is exactly the same. It's one and the same, in fact, as vCloud Director's multi-tenancy, which is really second to none. So a service provider can have multiple tenant organizations registered in. Ace Industry is an example of one of those. Each tenant organization can manage multiple virtual data centers. Those can be in the same room. They could be in different geographies, up to 100 milliseconds apart. And then within each virtual data center, traditionally vCloud Director has asked their customers to manage vApps, right? So collections of VMs with networks. I think the customer feedback on that has been, hey, we really just want to manage standalone VMs. Forget this vApp concept. So they've heard that from some of their customers, and so they've introduced this capability, and we're supporting that as well in our plugin. So going over the use cases, we'll start with the Cloud Admin. The Cloud Admin is responsible for defining policy templates, right? So it defines gold, silver, bronze. These are the SLAs that I want to offer for data protection to my tenants. A policy template is the combination of a schedule and a retention period, along with some options. There's not very many options available in the plugin today, but think of it as schedule plus retention period. Then they publish those policy templates out to tenant catalogs. So they can make gold and silver available to one tenant. They can make silver, ace, and bronze available to a different tenant. Okay, you get the idea? As they're doing that, they can configure a variety of quotas. So there's 3 different quota mechanisms that we've built into this. The first is, I'll talk about that one later. I think the one that Telefonica was particularly interested in and that they asked us to build in was these granular quotas on protected capacity. So what that means is, as I publish a policy out to a tenant catalog, I give them a certain capacity that they're able to protect. So, hey, Mr. Ace, you get 5 terabytes of gold, 50 terabytes of silver, and 500 terabytes of bronze. That can be a soft quota, which generates a warning. It can be a hard quota, which means that when they go to protect the next VM or the next vApp, they'll get an error message that says, I'm sorry, you've already exceeded, or you've already used 4.8 terabytes out of your quota. This vApp is 300 gigs. You don't have enough capacity to protect it. So you got to go back to your cloud provider, ask them for more. The second quota is a quota specifically for on-demand backups. Okay, so we've talked about policy-based backups, which have schedules and retentions, but there are on-demand backups, right? I'm about to upgrade this server. I want to take a backup before I do that. I want to do it right now. And so in this case, the cloud provider defines a global retention period for on-demand backups. So all on-demand backups are going to be 15 days or 30 days or whatever the case. And then the quota is on...
Is that per org VDC, not at the provider VDC level, right?
It's per org VDC.
Per org VDC. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's where this extension and integration happens, is at the org level, not the provider, right?
That's where most of the management happens, yeah. Yeah. So going back to the on-demand backups, they can configure a quota on the number of VMs that can be backed up. It's very simple. There's no capacity, nothing like that. It's just plain number of VMs. The next thing that cloud admins need to do is they need to configure the repositories. So repositories essentially equate to the data domain that's going to be used, right? So for every virtual data center, they're going to decide which data domain our backup's going to land on. And as they do that, they can set a quota for that VDC on the total amount of storage that can be used up on that data domain, as well as the amount of storage that can be used on a daily basis on that data domain. So that's the third type of quota that we're supporting. So it gives the service provider really a lot of control to essentially craft their business model, the way that they want to charge, in the way that makes the most sense for them. And we're trying to support a number of different business models there. Finally, when the service provider is configuring those repositories, he can also configure replication between them. So in this example with a VDC in Iowa and one in Ohio, he he could configure replication between those two locations. And that's data domain replication going back and forth. So that gives them a level of protection against a regional disaster. If you want to, if you have some kind of a failure in Ohio, you can, or the tenant will be able to recover their backups into the Iowa virtual data center from the data domain there based on a replicated copy.
Is the capability surfaced to the tenant to also configure replication or not? Or is that solely on the back of the provider?
That's on the back of the provider. So there is a DR capability for vCloud Director that's native called vCloud Availability. And that's, I guess that would be the solution that we would put forward for to give tenants that control. Make sense?
Is that a test deb type? So you have a fenced network created, and then you just restore everything that was in a particular VApp, for example, into another
Yes.
isolated environment.
Yeah. So I'm gonna get to that in the tenant use cases.
All right. Okay. Good.
One thing that in all the excitement I forgot to mention earlier is that this project with VMware was not only a co-engineering project, but it was also a partnership at the go-to-market level, at the sales and marketing level. And so VMware is actually on September 17th going to be selling data protection for VCD to their service providers. And the way that they're selling that, going back to some of the earlier discussion on pay by the drip and simplicity in licensing that Howard, banged us over the head on.
Oh, that wasn't banging.
He's just getting warmed up.
The guys will tell you that was gentle.
So, okay. So going back to that, the way that VMware is going to be selling it is through their VCPP program, if you're familiar with that, on a points basis. And it's a very simple model. It's per protected VM. It's a number of points per protected VM per month. End of story. And with that comes all of the DDVE licensing that you need, all of the Avamar, all of the DPA, all the software titles that we include in that bundle. It's all included for a very simple monthly price. And that allows them to, they can offer that same simple business model to their tenants as well, or they can leverage it to charge in a different way and make additional money, right?
So in that model, if a tenant is replicating VMs or VApps from one org VDC to another in different geographies,
Yeah.
Does that count as a single protected VM, or do you pay also at the secondary site?
That would be a single protected VM.
Okay.
Yeah. So because the replication is set up by the service provider, I would guess that for those tenants or for those tenants that are using the replication, that they've set up that replication for, they would probably charge them a different amount than the tenants who have chosen not to have that replication in place, right, in their contracts with the service provider. Okay, so the last use case for the cloud admin is accessing chargeback reporting. So included in the deployment of this plugin is a Postgres database, and we obviously document the table schema for that, and service providers can go in there and query, and they can generate their own reports, and they can generate reports on the protected capacity as well as on the amount of data, the diffs that were sent to data domain, and the deduplicated final storage values that are being taken up there. So they can access that reporting for the purposes of chargeback. As we shift over to the tenant use cases, here it's really dead simple because tenants are getting backup as a service. They're not managing data protection. All they're doing is consuming gold, silver, bronze, and applying those policies to different objects that they are managing. So the first way that they can do that is they can apply a default policy to a virtual data center, which means any new VApp that they create or any new VM that they create in that VDC is automatically going to get protected. So they might apply bronze there. But then they create an application or they have an application that's very important. They can override that default on a VApp basis or on a VM basis, and they can apply gold, right? Makes sense. So the tenant's responsible for applying the policies to their objects, to their workloads. And then the rest is really about different restore use cases. So they have a problem, they want to do some test dev, they can do an in-place restore if they have a failure, overwrite the VApp. They can do that for a subset of the VApp, they don't have to do the whole thing all at once. They can do a redirected restore, more for a test and dev, so that'll create a new instance on the side with different networks, right, potentially.
Granularity is per VM, right? Not per VM.
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
Granularity
The granularity is per VM.
per VM.
Yeah, so you can restore, now hold on, I have to remember, because there is a difference between the in-place and the new. If you're restoring to new, you do have to restore the entire VApp. Because of course, if you just restore a subset, you're not getting the
Yeah, it was
VApp.
in resource pool. But so restoring does also mean rewriting, or could you fence and have a restored VApp together with the existing VApp?
Yes, you can. So that's the restore to new. And in that use case, the tenant does need to restore the entire VApp. Unless they're in a model of managing standalone VMs, in which case they're restoring to new just a VM. The other use case for restore, well, actually there's two more, but restore to original. When you restore to original, you're overwriting the VMs that are already running. Of course, we don't let you do that if the VMs are running, so the VMs have to be down. We do protect against that. And in that case, they are able to restore individual VMs from within that VApp. Yeah. So then the final use case, and I'll admit it's not as well integrated into the plugin today, and we're going to address that this year, is the self-service file level restore. So tenants can access our file level restore UI. It's the same one that they get if they're using Avamar in an enterprise setting. And that allows them to restore files without having to reboot the VM or anything like that, right? So it's a very popular use case. And so tenants can absolutely access that. And then, of course, there's a monitoring interface where they can see the backups that are in progress. They can see past successful backups, past failed backups, this type of thing, and they can get some information about what's going on, and then talk to their service provider if they're having problems, right? So that's all there. And that gives you really a complete view of all of the use cases that we support for data protection with vCloud Director today. Okay, and you'll see a lot of this in the demo that I'm going to show. So this is a top-level screenshot. There's in vCloud Director, this is the tenant portal UI, so this is what tenants log into as an org admin. If you go up to the hamburger menu there, you get data protection. That's if that tenant has been registered, then they're going to see the data protection option, and that will lead them into the portion of the UI where they can manage data protection. And this is just showing a couple of other screenshots. I'm about to show a demo, so you're going to see all this anyway in real life.
Just to go back to the replication piece, I mean, the premise behind self-service for the client is to give them options to be able to manage their data protection strategy, the backing up of their workloads, but also getting it off-site if they have another org VDC somewhere.
Yeah.
From the provider point of view, the benefit of self-service outside of a better experience for the customer is to reduce the operational overhead and ticket flow on the operation side.
Yep.
I think it would be great to surface the capability within the VCD UI for clients to be able to say, yeah, I know I'm protecting my workloads locally through data protection and data domain and all these different policies that you mentioned, which are awesome. But it just seems like it stops short of kind of fulfilling that full configuration for them to feel confident and comfortable that, my workloads and data are fine here.
Yep.
And I can choose if I want to on a per app or per vApp or per VM basis to ship it off site so they can restore in VCD, which feels the same.
Right. So I mean that might be sort of the next set of use cases that we tackle with this. I think the way that it would work today that might make sense, and you tell me, is the service provider or the tenant can set up, they can sort of have that control at the virtual data center level. So they can set up a replicated virtual data center, and in their contract with the service provider, that would be a different service level than the VDC sitting beside it that's not replicated, right? And that would be the granularity that we would be able to do that at today.
One item I would kind of bring out there is that from an architecture perspective, when you're deploying our solutions, kind of a ground, foundational component would be actually having both a primary and a replicated target, right? Protect against the sprinkler, right? The cabinet fire, whatever might happen, right? So by default, you are going to expect to have a primary and a replicated copy of your backup workload. So when you look at that as kind of we're setting up as a cloud admin, the fundamental pieces to be consumed, that would just be on by default. And then the drivers that you might expose upstream to your tenants would be to select, maybe I only want 30 days local and 14 in the remote site, something like that. Have more granular policies. So once you had that set up, then it could be consumed in the catalog. Versus having the customer being able to drive down into your infrastructure and start flipping bits to turn on, whoops, we just decided we're going to replicate 60 or 70 terabytes of image data across into your secondary footprint, where you as a provider now have to address that unexpectedly.
Right, and I would say that's a fair point. Right. There's two levels we see. There's the protection of the service and the availability of the data that provides it, and those customers that have selected replication offsite, right, to protect it somewhere else and make it available for restore. But there's also a lot of test dev, cost control. Customers may not need that, right? And to by default turn that knob so that everybody gets it. There's a cost that the provider has to pass on that the customer may not want, right? And that's always a consideration.
Yeah, and for that particular use case, that would simply be on the cloud side, on the undercloud perspective, provisioning the non-replicated, right? With the acceptance and the caveat, hopefully the big red note that says, by the way, if your backups expire or whatever, then you don't have anywhere else, right? This is part of the policy. And again, it's a balancing thing that we've talked about, where we are looking at what a cloud provider would do in terms of configuring the services, knowing what the infrastructure is under there for use, and how it can be consumed, and how we charge, and then upstream from a consumption perspective, trying to make it as simple as possible that you simply consume those policies. Thank you.
So here we've logged in as this is the tenant view. So we've logged in as a tenant org administrator, and we go up to that hamburger menu, and we're able to select data protection. The first thing that comes up is this dashboard, and the dashboard gives the tenant a view of how many VMs, how many vApps are in that virtual data center, what the protection stance is for them, how many are protected by which policies, and how are they doing against their quotas. Then we've got two tabs along the top there, VMs and vApps. So we manage them separately, even though all of the actions are all the same. And that's purely just a question of scale, of being able to sort of separate out the objects in that virtual data center and present them in a logical way. So if we go into the Manage Policies action on a vApp, here we'll see, I'm going to pause this for a second. On the left-hand side, we have the policies that have been published to that tenant's catalog. So this tenant has two policies available to him. We're looking at a vApp with two VMs. He has the ability to protect the entire vApp or protect a subset of the vApp with any policy that he likes. He can even protect a subset or the entire vApp with multiple policies. Okay? So once he's happy with that protection, he can go back to this tenant UI, and along the left-hand side here, he'll be able to take an ad hoc backup. So this is the on-demand backup that's going to draw down on that second quota mechanism that I mentioned. So now he gets a notification that that backup is started. He can go over to the monitoring tab. I think that's what's coming up. Oh, not yet. Okay. So we're going over to the policy view now. We're not sure, what does this policy mean? So we can go and see the details. What's the schedule? What's the retention? The schedule, and I should expand on that because I'm not going to have time to show the service provider demo. when the service provider configures a schedule and the retention, along with that is configuration of the backup window, how long are backups allowed to run, right? And then also configuration of what time does this schedule kick off every Wednesday. Okay, so that allows the service provider to, for instance, stagger backups, right? He could have some tenants that are backing up at 8 p.m. Pacific. He could have other tenants that are backing up at 8 p.m. In Bangalore, right? So Bangalore is a little bit far for a single VCD deployment, but you get the idea. So you can stagger the backups and even have staggered backups for a single tenant. And that helps to address some of the scale issues that can happen with data protection, right? So here you can see all the details of that policy, and he can also see which VApps are protected, and at the top, how is he doing against his quota for this policy. And we'll just wait for Charlie to catch up to my talk track here. So we're showing the VApps and the standalone VMs separately, again, in this UI. So now he's going over to the monitoring tab, and he can see that this ad hoc backup that he kicked off is running. There's some filters on the top right there. He can go and see past successful ones, past failed ones, and he can see some data about how long did that backup run, that type of thing. Now if he goes back to the VApps tab, there's the option to show all of the restore points that are available for that VApp. And from there, he can click on the action button again and restore from any one of those restore points. And he's going to get two options. In this case, restore to original is grayed out because that VApp is still running. So he chooses restore to new. And that takes him to a wizard that takes him through the restore process. So he needs to name that because it is a new VApp that he's creating. So he needs to name it. He needs to configure the leases for it, decide which virtual machines he's going to restore. So actually, I guess I misspoke earlier because I thought that with restore to new, we didn't have the capability to restore individual VMs, but I was confused, and we do have that capability. So he can choose the VMs. And then he can configure the networks that are going to get restored with that new VApp.
So if you're restoring new and the original is still there, are you reconfiguring networking and MAC address so there's no?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, those new VMs are going to show up with completely new UUIDs, MAC addresses, and new IP addresses. Yeah. And I think that's really the end of the demo. So, I mean, it's a very simple user experience for tenants. There's not a lot there because they're not actually managing data protection. They're just using it.
Now, I've worked with a lot of clients, and one thing that I've seen that's been very helpful is the ability to, a machine may need to be restored. It's not functioning properly, but it's still up in the moment. Being able to restore that machine but not turn it on so I can do a cutover immediately, is that something that might be on the roadmap?
We don't have that on the roadmap now, I don't think. So the capabilities that we have are really to overwrite a VM that's not running. So if there was an ability to stop that VM.
This is more of it's funky. It's not dead. It's still alive. It's still doing something.
Yeah,
you know.
I've seen and heard of those types of issues.
The longer it's off, the more alerts go out and more people get involved. So if you can do the cutover. Yeah.
So it's something I'll have to investigate because I don't know if we would have at our disposal the appropriate controls to do that, or if vCloud Director would prevent us from doing that. But it's certainly something we can look into.
Very good. Thank you.
I have a more general question. I think it's not specifically vCloud Director. It's, again, going back to the service provider model.
Yep.
Say, whatever the size of the appliance. So if you're talking about the hardware side of it as well now, one of the things that some say companies or tenants become sort of nervous about having their data mixed or their storage mixed. So isolation, network and data isolation, that's what they ask for, even though rightly or wrongly.
Sure.
They don't buy into the idea of having all of these different companies together on the same, say, platter.
Yeah.
So do you have some sort of isolation in those regards, either network or storage?
So if you think about the underpinning architecture and ability to subscribe to multiple protection systems, that would be probably your path today for that with this particular architecture. So you have capability at the protection storage layer to do global deduplication with security by having different front-end systems, in this case Avamar, that would be your policy engine broken down and segregating that data, right? And then you could perform isolation, you could ensure you have things like encryption at rest in your protection storage layer. Outside of that, you would be having to look at trying to subdivide and deploy discrete stacks if they needed that level of air gapping, right? But the ability to consume multiples of those systems would provide you facility to address that, whether I've got general purpose, general population that are capable and comfortable with, I just need backup as a service, get more secure, then you go the other way. The software-defined capabilities that we provide with all of our solutions, the capability to encapsulate that orchestration engine in a VM, and allowing you to take advantage of the protection storage scale in the back end or deploy the software protection storage, can give you a lot of flexibility to spin up and spin down as well, right? So you got the ability to consume that, and as far as the extension is concerned, it's just another protection system running appropriate code. We don't care that it's virtualized or a blend or physical or whatever. So that's what we're doing today. Certainly multi-tenancy and that end-to-end security is something that is obviously raised at all times, and the SP market has raised the challenges with that with us.
I mean, coming from the point of view of, say, for example, a service provider says, okay, I'm going to have your kit in my data center and sort of carve it up to provide a service to my clients at a cost, probably chargeable, and they make their own money, obviously, on that. So the charging model, but also, those kind of things.
Right.
Obviously, you presented and you've got your product. But if I were to ask you that, what is different about your product that any other vendor is not providing, what would you say to that?
Fundamentals in terms of the general data protection solutions, comprehensive coverage at scale, performance, and efficiency with extensibility to address your growing use cases, right? Public cloud, private, blended, next gen, all of it.
Those are really our traditional, differentiators and competitive advantages, is those things.
Cost to serve.
Okay.
Would it be fair to say that cost is part of that as well?
Correct.
In the market that
all
you're
those efficiencies
targeting?
drive that cost to serve, and that's critical for everybody, right?
And if you dive into individual solutions, individual markets, like for instance, vCloud direct or service providers, we could talk about other aspects. I mean, nobody else is doing the seamless integration at the portal level, and that turns out to be incredibly important to service providers because it goes directly to them differentiating their service offering, right? And we're successful when they're successful. So.